Hello, Brobs. We're back with So the Witch Won't Eat Me. Fantasy and the Child's Fear of Infanticide by Dorothy Bloch. We move on to the pleasant chapter of a girl's obsession with marrying her father, chapter 11, which I'm going to read hastily as I must go to action. In his pioneer study of neurotic illness, Freud concluded that the central causative factor was the Oedipus complex, the universal desire of the son, pardon my hiccup, to marry his mother and to kill his father. Although his discovery of the universality of such wishes and feelings was an incalculable contribution to our understanding of psychic functioning, his assignment to them of a nuclear role in the genesis of emotional problems created a formidable obstacle to further exploration for many years. In my own experience with patients, I have found that where the Oedipus complex becomes pathological, it is the result of an imbalance in the familial relationship and is frequently a measure of the parents' hostility. Where children feel loved, they appear to take the Oedipal situation in their stride. Although I had always suspected that a pathological Oedipus complex might represent a defense against the terror of infanticide, it was not until my treatment of Janet that this concept was dramatically confirmed. When I finally understood her obsessive fantasy of defeating her rival for her father's affection, and of then actually marrying him, it was clear that I was being confronted with a response to violence as well as an Oedipus complex. For several years, no amount of logic could persuade Janet that fathers in our society do not marry their daughters. Only after analytic treatment had succeeded in diminishing her fear that her father would kill her could she relinquish her fantasy of controlling his violence through seduction. Janet was a pre-adolescent who was referred to me because of what appeared to her parents to be increasingly irrational behavior, and her most immediate rival was not her mother, but her sister Anne, 2 years younger. I had already noted in instances where parents reject each other or where the parent of the same sex is absent for long or frequent periods that the child's fantasies concerning the availability of the parent of the opposite sex develop without the usual restraints imposed by reality. As I learned later, Janet had no doubt that her parents hated each other and that her mother had absolutely no sexual interest in her father. She and her sister, therefore, had an open field. She eventually presented her perception of their relationship in those terms. Women are so much the grasping vine creeping over the cold male who thinks women are cotton candy horrors. That's a good line. How they related to her, she summed up in her description of the nightly ritual, referring to herself as a beanbag with glazed button eyes, sitting at the dinner table, eating dust and drinking mud, and getting darted by the two warlords at either end of the table. Initially, the mystifying factor in Janet's obsessive fantasy of marrying her father was that she did not love him but hated him. Not only did she hate him, she lived in daily terror of his abusive attacks, which were mainly verbal where she was concerned but were physically violent against her brother, who was 3 years older. Janet remained in treatment until her early 20s, when she and her husband moved to the West Coast, and in all that time her fear apparently froze any expression of tenderness or affection for her father. Therefore concluded at an early stage in her analysis that her determination to marry him was a defense against her terror. This was clarified much later when she recalled taking a shower with him at a time when his erect penis was at just her eye level. Jesus Christ. Following that memory, this sounds like the Joe Biden story. Following that memory, she became aware that seduction played a major role in her father's way of relating to her and provided her only sense of mastery over him. She recalled taking a shower with him at a time. This isn't seduction, this is him raping you. Anyway, unlike Norma, who had never experienced violence from either parent but unconsciously regarded her brother as the agent of her mother's concealed wishes, Janet's exposure to her father's violence, he's raping her. Why isn't this woman saying that he's raping her? Or is that considered part of the violence? Was soon established as a regular part of daily life. Janet, also lacking the ameliorating influence of Norma's environment, her father's genuine loving feelings, and her mother's complete absorption in the physical care of the family, which Norma experienced as love. Janet's mother was ill during part of her childhood, but even when she was well, she left the care of the family to household help. When Janet was able to confront her feelings about her some years later, she stated, "She has black insides and no love." Her father's violence and his seductive charm therefore operated in an atmosphere that offered little protection. A neurotic depression with its disguised identity rooted in feelings of worthlessness, which met Norma's needs, could not accommodate Janet's. Her unalleviated terror had carried her to the brink of psychosis, and by the time of her referral, she was beginning to find refuge in a psychotic depression. Because of Janet's age, I had the advantage of periodic contact with her parents, which enabled me to learn at first hand about them and their relationship both to each other and to Janet. In addition, circumstances provided me with the opportunity of understanding Janet's experiences through her written communications. About 3 years after her treatment began, her family's move to another city made even weekly visits impractical. After a year of sporadic sessions, she was able to arrange to see me on a bi-weekly basis. Since that scarcely met her needs, she attempted a partial solution by writing voluminous letters. This correspondence permitted her a freedom of expression that she had not yet been able to achieve on the couch, and allowed me a glimpse into her emotional life that might otherwise have taken many more years to acquire. Like Norma's and Johnny's journals, her writing provided us with a vivid record of her fantasy and her efforts at survival. Remembering the Janet of later years, I find it difficult to summon up that earlier image of a very slight girl with honey-colored hair, large sad eyes, and set, unsmiling face, frightened and secretive. Her distracted, unhappy expression and her ugly school clothes scarcely prepared me for the unusual beauty that she revealed one day when she came dressed for a party. Early in her treatment, I also noted a curious quality in her manner of communicating, which took several years to define. It appeared to be a distillation of concentrated intensity and yet of distance, of a kind of tonelessness that related not only to sound, but to color, perhaps of a lifelessness that was carefully maintained. Her mother was a tall, fairly attractive blonde woman in her early 30s, with a queenly air that proved to be a formidable defense. Her unrelenting affability, her persistent demonstrations of concern and goodwill permitted the emergence of not even a shadow of either the rage or the terror that one could only suspect lurked behind that armor. Although as Janet's treatment liberated her fury, it became very clear that her mother could expect little immediate joy from her daughter's cure, beyond the satisfaction of seeing her well. She never wavered in her support of the analysis. Although she never stated it directly, my monthly sessions with her soon established that she felt she had given birth to an abnormal child, that there was and always had been something mystifyingly wrong with Janet. At times, she suggested Janet's communications did not seem rational. The only hint that Janet's problems might be related anyway to her response to her parents' feelings surfaced only in her reference to Janet's rivalry with her sister. Her husband had originally favored Janet, she stated, but had later transferred his affection. Although a battery of psychological tests revealed a wide gap between Janet's superior intelligence and her functioning, her mother felt that Janet's problems had never interfered with her progress at school, nor affected her social relationships. My first session with Janet's father has always remained vividly with me and contained all the elements with which I became so familiar. He was a lawyer, a tall, heavy-set, bearded man in his late 30s, extraordinarily charming and radiating warmth, candor, and goodwill. It was therefore with something of a shock that I heard him comment on his way out that he was a bad character, who sometimes lost his temper. That was the first hint of the explosive violence that both Janet and her mother later reported. During that first session, he also volunteered the information that Janet had been left too much with babysitters during infancy, the only suggestion that Janet's problems were not congenital and, like his wife's, involved the other parent. I saw him only a few times in the course of Janet's treatment, and beyond the fact that he had one older brother, I learned almost nothing about his background, either from him or Janet. I was kept equally in the dark about Janet's mother despite her more frequent visits. Perhaps my own lack of success in penetrating the mystery of her origins explains to some degree Janet's almost complete ignorance of her history, except to say that she was the youngest of a large Midwestern family whom Janet never met. Janet's mother disclosed nothing about herself. Not only were Janet's parents unknown to her, however, but in all the time I knew Janet, she evinced not the slightest curiosity about the factors that could have created their destructive personalities. Although I have very often been struck by a seeming lack of interest on the part of many patients concerning the kind of life experience that could have produced their parents' way of relating to them, the crucial reason for it was nowhere more clearly demonstrated than in Janet's case. I don't think I have encountered a patient who knew less about her parents' early lives or was less inclined to know more. Her investment in camouflaging both their identities and her own apparently demanded that they remain undefined. As in most instances, self deception operated in Janet's case as a way of maintaining the fantasy that it was her worthlessness that had caused them to hate and to want to destroy her, and that as soon as she changed, they would love her. Her devalued self image and her assumption of responsibility for her parents' feelings, as well as her idealized parental image, served to obscure her parents' limited capacity for love. Her hope of eventually being loved rested on the denial of the reality and of the validity of her perceptions. At first, I was bewildered by a quality in her communications that could not be explained until I realized that it was simply a consistent omission of any reference to herself. It was like being presented with a puzzle that was incapable of solution because the salient pieces were missing. I gradually became aware, however, that her secret conviction that she was the mysterious cause of all that went on in her environment was not only a constant preoccupation and an unverbalized fear, but also a major defense. It was the hidden source of all the questions she brought to her sessions. There was one girl, for instance, who sat beside her on Monday, but on Tuesday selected a seat several rows away. Why? The daily struggle with her sister, which appeared to date from the beginning of time, was reported in a similarly flat, matter-of-fact way. It started with each new day and subsided only during sleep, and then sometimes only partially. They set traps for each other, plotted and betrayed, and constantly sought some new excuse for conflict, which was mainly verbal or confined to spiteful little acts. Janet would not have said it was she who initiated the conflict, only that she was often blamed for it. Neither would she have admitted that she was jealous of Anne or knew that Anne was their father's favorite. Her idea of feminine beauty, however, invariably took Anne's black hair, dark eyes, and fair skin as its frame of reference. As for their father, it would never at that point have occurred to Janet to admit that she wanted his or anyone else's affection, or that she felt she didn't have it. The marked absence on a conscious level of any defined objective in the all-absorbing competition with Anne was another facet in a way of life that was rooted in a need not to know. During the first 2 years of her treatment, her presentation of the nightly turbulence at the dinner table also had the character of a weather report that registered the heat, the humidity, the barometric pressure, and the wind velocity without any reference either to their impact on her or to the dynamics of these seemingly natural phenomena. Just as she never inquired about the source of her father's constant rages, she also accepted her mother's persistent silence at his abusive attacks, which both robbed Janet and her brother and sister of any sense of safety and further appeared to lend an air of respectability and appropriateness to his violence. Although she kept her inner functioning a secret during the initial period of her analysis and only gradually relinquished her constriction and constraint and withdrawal, at first tentatively and then with mounting intensity, she finally gave vent to the repressed rage that had kept her paralyzed. It then became clear that no matter how severely she castigated her parents, the direction of the attack inevitably reversed itself and found a more acceptable target, herself. No matter how much she lashed out at them, she invariably ended by insisting it was her worthlessness that made them hate her, and offered an incontrovertible proof her intolerable murderous response to their murderous feelings. I am a mistake, she wrote. A great growing octopus that's unwanted and hateful and hating, ugly and ready to explode on people who want to tie me up and stick me in a closet and kill it. Shut it out of love. Love is a stupid illusion. Who loves? No one. Not me. I don't. No one loves me. Why should they? They just look at what I am. as I had already noted in other instances in which actual self deception was not confined to psychological reality, but was extended to the physical world. Through Janet's correspondence, I learned for the first time that the elusive quality that kept nagging at me from the very beginning stemmed from her concentration on maintaining the fantasy that she was invisible. It was with a feeling of recognition that I read, "I feel so uncomfortable with myself whenever I think anyone else knows I'm alive." In further clarification of the device she employed in order to create a feeling of safety, she wrote, "It's really strange that the possibility exists of you seeing the actual people I know, because half the time I have the feeling I'm talking about imaginary people. I think of you as completely separate from my everyday life, and if you should chance to enter it by seeing someone I know, that's strange and scary because that means I'm a person. I can't get away with pretending I'm invisible because apparently I'm not." She explained, "I used to think, and sometimes still do, that I'm not real. And only when I thought I and others were not really communicating and being real that they could like me and I could stand them." In order to establish her reality, sometimes she had to invent exercises for herself. The other day I couldn't believe I was real, so I had to write down all the things I do that no one else does. Sometimes I wonder who is the person living in this room here, who arranged everything this way, who chose what to do with it. Someone did, must be me, but I have trouble feeling this. The problem of concealing her own forbidden feelings and of defending herself against her parents was met by the development of what she called a glaze, stating, "In my family, glaze was essential in order to keep myself together in one piece. It's like a big campaign to have everyone like me, and the way to do that is to efface all my qualities, good and bad, so they won't make people not like me. If I'm me, nothing will work. The glaze makes me tolerable to myself. Inside it, I think I am perfect and pure, and I don't think about my humanness." Such descriptions already heralded the cracking of the glaze. There were statements at this time such as, "I want to be me all the time with no compromise for anyone." Or, "The whole problem is that it's gotten to the point where I don't even realize the thickness of the wall I've surrounded myself with. Although I feel the pain of the vacuum inside, I want to believe anything bad I hear about myself, and am always busy making up things in addition." At moments, panic ensued and fears of insanity came to the fore. If I didn't preserve the last ounce of consciousness and control, I would really disintegrate. She then wrote, "I just want a big soft answer to everything wrong with me, like a mother." The pain of a vacuum inside created by the glaze drove her at a certain point to toy with drugs. She was attracted to people who smoked marijuana, used mescaline, and took her to parties where heroin was also in evidence. She didn't succumb, however. I don't even realize what the danger of marijuana is for me, except that I might really screw up problems now by finding a false way out. That's the only thing that keeps me from giving in to my curiosity. At a particularly bad time, she stated, "I really feel awful and have started the crimes against myself again, which are making me more miserable than I can imagine. If I had given in to pot, which I am not going to do, I would have been smoking for the past 3 days. And again, I've been vaguely thinking about mescaline, but I just realized for the first time, really, that I don't want drug visions because that would wreck the strength and excitement of the ones I already have." In the service of the fantasy that dictated that she conceal her brilliance and thus justify her parents' feelings, she spent her first 2 years at college neglecting her work and just getting by. Although she permitted her talents to come through during the next two, she still maneuvered to create academic chaos by allowing papers and examinations to pile up. She wrote at this time, "The more I realize how completely deranged I could let myself be, the less I am able to let myself approach it. These rather extreme terms, sane, etc., are not exaggerations of how I feel. So I'm insane and a little foolish to get myself into such a totally unnecessary mess when I could be brilliant and happy. And a month later, if it weren't for analysis, I'd have been dead long ago. Not really, but I would have definitely been insane if I feel I come so close to it even now sometimes. I can look over the edge and not fall in, though." And that's going to have to do it because I got to get ready for work there, buddy. All right, Bob. Goodbye, bruv. Goodbye.